The emergency session of the Galactic Archaeological Summit had been called with the kind of urgency usually reserved for imminent supernovas or accidental violations of causality, which, in the academic world, meant it took only 3 weeks to convene instead of the usual 6 months. Research Station Kepler-7 now hosted 247 of the galaxy's most distinguished xenoarchaeologists, all buzzing with excitement over what was being called the discovery of the millennium. On Dolvara Prime, a dusty backwater planet in the outer rim that nobody had bothered colonizing because it had absolutely nothing going for it, a mining crew had accidentally broken through into an underground vault. Inside, they found what appeared to be an ancient weapons cache, the kind that made careers, the kind that rewrote textbooks, the kind that made tenure committees weep tears of joy. The problem was, nobody had any idea what they were looking at. The artifacts predated every known civilization in the sector. The metallurgy was sophisticated yet primitive. The designs were elegant yet brutal. And the combat applications were obvious yet completely foreign to every military historian in attendance. For a galaxy that had largely moved past physical violence around the same time humans were figuring out agriculture, these objects were deeply, profoundly confusing. Dr. Patricia Kowalski, who absolutely insisted everyone call her Trish, sat in the back row of the auditorium and tried to look interested. She was Earth's sole representative at the summit, mostly because the Galactic Council had quotas to fill, and someone from the Xenoarchaeology department at Columbia had to attend. Trish had drawn the short straw, or won the lottery, depending on how you looked at 3 weeks away from grading undergraduate papers. The aliens had been perfectly polite when she arrived. The kind of polite that made it clear they considered Earth's 40-year membership in the Galactic Council to be adorable, like a toddler joining a philosophy department. Sure, humans were technically allowed at the grown-up table, but nobody expected them to contribute anything meaningful. Trish was fine with that. It meant she could sit in the back, work on her own research, and enjoy the station's surprisingly excellent coffee substitute without anyone bothering her. That arrangement had worked beautifully for the first 2 days of the summit, right up until the moment the lead researcher activated the holographic display, and Trish choked on her bagel. Professor Quilnax was first to present. The Zentarii scholar approached the holographic display with all 4 arms clasped in what Trish had learned was their species' gesture of profound academic reverence. His crystalline eyes refracted the light from the projections as he gestured dramatically at the first artifact, a short double-edged blade with a distinctive tapered point. Colleagues, Quilnax began, his voice resonating through his thorax in that way that always made translation software sound extra pompous. Observe the ritual symmetry, the bilateral balance, the ceremonial perforation along the fuller, clearly designed for channeling metaphysical energies during interdimensional summoning rites. Trish bit her lip. Hard. Note the handguard geometry, Quilnax continued, now using 3 arms to manipulate the hologram, while the 4th brought up a comparison chart. This transcendent barrier between wielder and blade represents the liminal space between our reality and the next. I propose this artifact was used by priest warriors to literally cut holes in space-time during their most sacred ceremonies. The audience murmured appreciatively. Someone in the front row was taking notes so frantically their stylus was smoking. Commander Breen rose next, his Krell battle armor clinking softly as he lumbered to the front. Despite being from a warrior culture, the Krell had not actually fought a war in 3,000 years, which meant their military historians had gotten really, really theoretical about violence. With respect to my esteemed colleague, Breen rumbled, his mandibles clicking, I believe we are looking at agricultural implements that evolved into objects of veneration. Observe this specimen. He highlighted the battle axe, its double-bladed head catching the light menacingly. The dual-cutting surfaces would be ideal for processing fibrous plants. The perpendicular handle attachment provides optimal leverage for repetitive harvesting motions. Over time, farming communities would have deified these tools, attributing spiritual significance to their life-giving function. Trish coughed to disguise a laugh. It came out as more of a strangled wheeze. A few aliens glanced back at her with concern. She gave them a thumbs up, which she immediately remembered was considered obscene in at least 3 of the species present. She switched to a friendly wave. Dr. Vennick practically levitated to the podium, his Asturian hover robes billowing with self-importance. He had 3 doctoral degrees, and he had mentioned this fact approximately 47 times since the summit began. Trish was counting. Clearly, Vennick announced in a tone that suggested anyone who disagreed was an idiot. We are observing musical instruments of unprecedented sophistication. This curved blade, he zoomed in on the katana, is obviously a percussion device. The wielder would strike it against resonant surfaces to create complex rhythmic patterns. And this hollow tube with the trigger mechanism, he indicated the flintlock pistol, is a primitive wind instrument, possibly used to summon weather patterns or, more likely, to call forth ancient deities through harmonic resonance. He brought up a three-dimensional acoustic analysis that looked like someone had taught a kaleidoscope to do math. My team has calculated the theoretical sound frequencies these instruments would produce. The data suggests a civilization with hearing ranges far beyond our own, possibly existing partially in dimensions we cannot perceive. The auditorium erupted in applause. Vennick bowed deeply, all three of his degrees practically glowing with smugness. Trish looked at her half-eaten sandwich, then at the display, then back at her sandwich. She was suddenly much less hungry. After 6 more presentations that included theories about fertility symbols, star mapping tools, and something called quantum meditation anchors, the summit moderator finally glanced at the attendance roster and noticed Earth's representative with the vague surprise of someone remembering they left the oven on. "Ah, yes, Dr. Kowalski from Earth. Perhaps you would like to share your species' perspective on these findings." The way he said it made it clear he expected nothing useful. Maybe some charming observations about how the pretty shapes reminded her of things from her primitive homeworld. A few polite sentences before they moved on to serious academic discussion. Trish stood up, grabbed her tablet, and made her way to the front of the auditorium. 246 alien eyes, or eye equivalents, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed condescension. She stopped in front of the display case containing the actual artifacts, not just the holograms. Took a long look, sighed deeply. "Okay, so," Trish began, pointing at the short, double-edged blade. "That is a Gladius. It is a Roman short sword. The Romans were this empire on Earth that lasted about 500 years, give or take, depending on how you count. They conquered approximately half of Europe, chunks of Africa and the Middle East, using primarily these swords and really impressive logistics. Also, roads. They were very into roads." The room had gone completely silent. "This one," she moved to the axe, "is a Viking battle axe. Vikings were Scandinavian raiders who spent roughly 3 centuries terrifying the living daylights out of coastal communities across Europe. They were exceptional sailors and pretty enthusiastic about the whole pillaging thing. This axe would have been used to, and I cannot stress this enough, chop people." Professor Quilnax's crystalline eyes had stopped refracting light. They were now just staring. "The mace," Trish continued, gesturing at the spiked metal ball on a stick, "was a medieval weapon designed specifically to deal with armored opponents. See, swords don't work great against plate armor, so someone invented a club with metal bits to just, crush the armor and the person inside it. Very effective. Very messy." She moved to the katana. "This is a Japanese katana. Folded steel, curved blade, optimized for cutting through basically anything with a single draw cut. The samurai, who carried these, were a warrior class that dominated Japanese society for like 700 years. There is an entire philosophical tradition built around these swords. It is called Bushido. It is very serious and very much about killing people with honor and precision." Commander Breen made a sound like a garbage disposal choking on silverware. "And this," Trish picked up the flintlock pistol, and half the auditorium flinched, "is a flintlock pistol from approximately the 17th or 18th century. Earth calendar. It uses gunpowder, which is a chemical explosive, to propel a lead ball at high velocity into someone you want to be dead. Point and shoot. Revolutionary technology at the time, pun intended, because there were a lot of revolutions happening when these were popular. Doctor?" Vennick had gone a color that Trish was reasonably sure was not healthy for Asturians. "So, to summarize," Trish said, setting the pistol down carefully and turning to face her audience, "these are not ceremonial tools, or farming equipment, or musical instruments, or fertility symbols, or whatever. These are weapons. Like, regular weapons. From Earth. From different time periods spanning about 2,000 years of human history." Quilnax found his voice first. But that is impossible. Your species only achieved spaceflight 60 years ago. Only joined the Galactic Council 40 years ago. These artifacts predate the Dulvara civilization by at least 8,000 standard years. How could primitive Earth weapons possibly end up in an ancient alien vault?" Trish shrugged. "That is actually a great question, and I have no idea. But I am 100% certain about what these things are. I have held replicas of every single one of these in museums. I have written papers about 3 of them. This is literally my job. You have, Vennick said weakly, written papers about instruments of violence? I mean, yeah, human history is kind of, really violent. We have entire academic fields dedicated to studying historical warfare. Military history is a major discipline. We have thousands of museums full of this stuff. The room remained silent. The kind of silence that happens when an entire worldview is being gently but firmly demolished. Perhaps, Professor Quilnax said carefully, his translator struggling with what sounded like a nervous clicking. You could provide some context? For academic purposes? Trish glanced around the auditorium. Every alien was leaning forward now, their earlier condescension replaced with something that looked disturbingly like concern. Sure. Okay. Context. Trish pulled up Earth's historical database on the holodisplay. So, the Gladius. Romans used these in formation fighting. They had this thing called a legion, which was about 5,000 soldiers, give or take. At the peak of the Roman Empire, they had like 30 legions, maybe more. They marched these armies across 3 continents and stabbed anyone who disagreed with Roman tax policy. She zoomed in on a historical map. See all this territory? That is what they conquered. With swords, and javelins, and siege weapons. And they held it for centuries through constant, continuous military action. Commander Breen's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. The Vikings, Trish continued, pulling up another map, were actually relatively small in number. But they had this advantage, where nobody expected them to show up in longboats and start axe-murdering their way through monasteries. They raided from roughly 800 AD to 1100 AD. That is 300 years of, let us call it, aggressive maritime entrepreneurship. 300 years? Someone whispered from the audience. Oh, that is nothing. Medieval Europe had this period called the 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years and involved England and France repeatedly invading each other. The mace was super popular during this era because armor had gotten really good, so you had to get creative about, killing the guy inside the armor. Trish was really getting into it now. The samurai were around, from like the 12th century to the 19th century. 700 years. Their entire social structure was built around being professional warriors. They practiced sword techniques their whole lives. There are schools of sword fighting that have been passed down for generations. She pulled up the Wikipedia page for Japanese history. Professor Quilnax's translator implant made a sound like a computer trying to process the concept of infinity and then sparked. He frantically yanked it out of his auditory port. And firearms, Trish said, tapping the flintlock. Revolutionized warfare completely. Once humans figured out gunpowder, we spent the next several centuries optimizing how to shoot each other from increasingly longer distances. Muskets, rifles, pistols, cannons, machine guns. We got really into it. Machine guns? Dr. Vennick croaked. Oh yeah, guns that fire continuously. Hundreds of rounds per minute. We used those extensively in World War I and World War II. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. World wars? Commander Breen said faintly. As in, multiple wars involving your entire world? 2 of them. Well, technically those are just the ones we call world wars. There have been a lot of wars. A lot. Like, so many wars. Trish started scrolling through the Wikipedia categories. Wars by century. Wars by region. Wars by type. Religious wars. Dynastic wars. Colonial wars. Civil wars. We have a whole list of wars page, and it is extremely long. An alien in the 3rd row made a sound like a tea kettle giving up on life. The thing is, Trish said, and she was starting to realize this was not landing the way she expected. Humans are actually really good at warfare. We have been doing it for our entire recorded history, basically nonstop. Every civilization, every culture, every nation. We fought each other with sticks and rocks, then bronze and iron, then steel and gunpowder, then explosives and chemicals, then, please, stop, Quilnax whispered, but Trish was on a roll. We developed complex tactical theories, strategic doctrines, military academies. We wrote books about it. Sun Tzu's Art of War is like 2,500 years old, and people still read it. Clausewitz, Machiavelli, we have entire philosophical traditions about the nature of conflict, and Dr. Kowalski, the moderator interrupted, his voice strained. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess this is kind of heavy. Trish looked around at the sea of horrified faces. I mean, it is just history. It is not like we do this stuff anymore. Mostly. Mostly, several voices said in unison. Dr. Vennick had recovered enough to float slightly upward in his hover robes, though he still looked like he had seen a ghost. Or several thousand ghosts, which, given the conversation, was probably accurate. Dr. Kowalski, he said carefully. You said humans do not do this anymore. Mostly. What precisely do you mean by mostly? Oh, well, we stopped fighting each other on Earth about 30 years ago, give or take. There are still some minor disputes, but nothing like the old days. No major wars since we unified under the Earth Coalition government. The visible relief in the room was palpable. Several aliens actually exhaled, or performed their species equivalent. See, the thing is, Trish continued, and the relief immediately evaporated. We did not stop because we suddenly became peaceful or evolved past violence or anything like that. We stopped because we ran out of each other to fight. The silence was deafening. By the mid-21st century, we had weapons that could destroy our entire planet. Multiple times over. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, autonomous drones, orbital strike platforms. We had gotten so good at killing each other that we were one bad Tuesday away from rendering Earth completely uninhabitable. So we had this collective moment of, oh crap, maybe we should not do. Commander Breen was gripping his seat with enough force that the metal was denting. The Earth Coalition formed primarily as a suicide prevention measure. For our entire species, we unified because the alternative was extinction, and even humans are not that committed to warfare. Usually, there was a pretty intense debate about it. You debated whether to avoid extinction? Quilnax whispered. I mean, there were holdouts. Some countries really liked their sovereignty. But yeah, eventually everyone agreed that planetary survival was more important than national pride. It only took 3 near apocalypses and some very tense negotiations. Trish pulled up another document. So we joined the Galactic Council because, honestly, we needed something to do with all that competitive energy. Turns out, when you spend 10,000 years optimizing conflict, you get really good at competition in general. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, sports, academic rivalries. We just redirected everything into non-lethal outlets. Non-lethal outlets, Dr. Vennick repeated numbly. Yeah, it has been great. Humans are actually really enjoying the whole galactic community thing. We are good at it. The skills transfer surprisingly well. Strategic thinking, resource management, forming alliances, understanding adversary motivations. Turns out millennia of warfare teaches you a lot about negotiation. Someone in the audience made a connection. So when humans joined the Galactic Council and immediately dominated the trade arbitration committees, we are just applying game theory we developed for war, but nicely, with words and spreadsheets instead of weapons. And the human athletic leagues that are now the most watched sports in 3 sectors. Sublimated combat instincts. We like competition. We are just doing it in ways that do not involve actual death now. Progress. The moderator had his head in his hands. Or hand equivalents. Doctor Back. Kowalski, he said slowly. Are you telling us that humanity unified and joined galactic civilization not out of a desire for peace and enlightenment, but because you needed to stop yourselves from committing species-wide suicide, and now you are channeling thousands of years of military expertise into economic and cultural dominance? Trish thought about it. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. But yes, essentially yes. That is pretty much exactly what happened. The summit concluded approximately 47 minutes later, with the kind of hasty efficiency that suggested everyone suddenly remembered they had very important appointments. Elsewhere. Possibly in other galaxies. Professor Quilnax filed an emergency recommendation that the Dolvara Prime weapons cache be sealed, the vault filled with concrete, and the entire planet designated a quarantine zone. His report included the phrase, existential archaeological threat, 6 times in the first paragraph alone. Commander Breen excused himself to update the Galactic Military Database, which had not been meaningfully revised in 2,000 years because nobody had needed it. He created a new classification category specifically for humanity. Species of extreme concern, avoid antagonizing, potentially friendly, but historically catastrophic when bored. Dr. Vennick fainted when Trish casually mentioned that nuclear weapons were primitive by current human standards, and that humanity had continued developing theoretical weapons systems during the unification period, just in case. He was revived by medical staff, and immediately booked the fastest transport back to Asturia, citing urgent personal reasons that definitely were not crying in his quarters for several days. Trish packed up her tablet and notes, honestly a bit confused by everyone's reaction. She thought she had been fairly diplomatic about the whole thing. She had not even mentioned the really weird parts of human history, like the Emu War, or that time two countries almost went to nuclear war over a soccer game. As she headed toward the exit, she passed by the display case one more time. Something caught her eye. Tucked in the back, behind the Gladius and mostly hidden by the mace, was a small bronze dagger she had not noticed before. It was covered in strange geometric patterns and had an odd weight to it, even through the transparent case. Trish leaned in closer. The metallurgy was wrong. The design was unfamiliar. The craftsmanship was unlike anything she had seen from any Earth culture. She carefully opened the case, which everyone had forgotten to lock in their rush to evacuate, and picked up the dagger, turned it over in her hands, studied the markings. "Huh," she said to the empty auditorium. "Actually, I have no idea what this one is." She shrugged, tossed it back into the case with a metallic clatter, and headed for the door. Behind her, the emergency alarms began blaring. The station's AI, which had been monitoring the display case, had just registered an unknown artifact being handled and detected energy signatures that matched no known technology in the galactic database. By the time security arrived, Trish was already on the shuttle back to Earth, listening to a podcast about ancient Mesopotamian siege tactics, and completely unaware that she had just triggered a station-wide evacuation. The bronze dagger sat in its case, its geometric patterns glowing faintly in the empty room, as 246 of the galaxy's top xenoarchaeologists scrambled for the escape pods. Somewhere in the Galactic Council archives, a file was automatically updated. Next to humanity's entry, a new note appeared in urgent red text. Recommend extreme caution. Species has 10,000 years of warfare experience, and genuinely cannot tell the difference between their own weapons and potentially reality-threatening alien artifacts. Approach with existential dread. The summit would not reconvene for another 5 years, and when it did, Earth's invitation would mysteriously get lost in bureaucratic processing. Trish never noticed. She was too busy writing a paper about Roman logistics networks and wondering why none of her alien colleagues ever responded to her emails anymore.